If you lie to a queen, you might save your life, but you'll lose something far more permanent. The chamber was 200 feet across, seamless and white, the walls breathing with a faint bioluminescent pulse like a living lung. No chains, no guards, just silence thick enough to taste. Ethan Cole stood alone in work boots still dusted with asteroid grit, hands steady at his sides, heart beating slow and deliberate beneath a borrowed formal jacket that didn't quite fit his shoulders. Above him, suspended 10 feet in the air, Queen Valethora watched without blinking, her blue-silver skin reflecting the chamber light in cold constellations. She did not sit on a throne. She didn't need one. Authority radiated from her like gravity. "Did you teach my daughter to doubt me?" Her voice carried no anger. That was worse. It moved through the air like tempered glass, clear, precise, unbreakable. Ethan felt the weight of an empire in that question. Billions of lives measured in his next breath. He could end this in 3 seconds. He could say no. He could bow his head, blame misunderstanding, claim human ignorance, trade honesty for safety, trade truth for access to the core systems humanity had only dreamed of mapping. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the walls, something organic shifted with a soft hydraulic sigh. He remembered the first time he met her daughter. Not a princess, not royalty. Just a young woman kneeling beside a ruptured coolant line on Dock 14, hands glowing faintly as she tried to seal a fracture she didn't fully understand. She had looked up at him, frustrated, proud, curious. "Why are you helping me?" she had asked after he'd sealed the breach and rerouted the flow with a strip of insulation and a wrench. He had shrugged. Because someone should. No speeches. No philosophy. Just that. Now the Queen's luminous eyes narrowed by a fraction of an inch. "My daughter has begun to question structure. Order. Obedience." Each word landed like a measured step. "She speaks of mercy as if it is strength." Ethan inhaled slowly. The air smelled sterile, faintly metallic, recycled 1,000 times. He felt small under her gaze. 5'11", 190 pounds. No rank. No weapon. Just a maintenance engineer from Ohio who fixed things that broke. He looked up at the most powerful being in the quadrant and didn't lower his eyes. "Your daughter didn't learn doubt from me," he said quietly. The chamber seemed to lean closer. Even the light dimmed a shade. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't apologize. "She learned compassion." The word hung there, fragile, human, unarmored. For the first time since he'd entered, the Queen did not speak immediately. Her glow flickered, just slightly. Not anger. Not weakness. Something else. And in that microscopic pause, in the space between command and response, Ethan realized the truth. This was never an interrogation. It was a test. And he had just chosen which side of history he wanted to stand on. The word compassion did not echo, yet it filled the chamber like expanding air. Ethan heard his own heartbeat in his ears, steady but louder now, as if his body understood the risk before his mind finished calculating it. Queen Valethora lowered herself a single inch, not enough to seem human, just enough to signal attention. Her eyes, luminous and ancient, searched his face as though scanning for corruption in a line of code. "Compassion reallocates resources to inefficiency," she said at last. "It disrupts hierarchy. It invites instability." Her voice remained calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Ethan could see his breath faintly now, or maybe it was only the light bending around her field. He kept his shoulders relaxed. He had worked in vacuum docks where one wrong movement could cost oxygen for 100 people. Panic had never repaired anything. "Instability is not always decay," he answered. "Sometimes it is growth." A faint murmur rippled through the living walls, a vibration like distant thunder restrained behind glass. He did not look away. He thought of Dock 14 again, of Princess Lyra kneeling in grease-streaked fabric that did not match her status, of the way she had listened when he explained pressure gradients using a broken wrench and a strip of tape. She had not acted like royalty. She had acted curious. "My daughter was engineered for leadership," the Queen continued. Her neural lattice was optimized for strategic dominance by the age of 12. 12. Ethan swallowed quietly. Back home, 12-year-olds worried about algebra tests and weekend games under Friday night lights. "She now questions directives," the Queen said. "She pauses before issuing orders. She considers emotional variables." The last phrase carried measurable disapproval. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not fear, but recognition. He had seen that pause before. On the dock, Lyra had hesitated before sealing a compartment that would have locked a junior technician outside. She had recalculated. She had chosen to pull the kid in first, even though it complicated the repair. That was the moment she had looked at him differently. You interpret her hesitation as weakness, Ethan said softly. I saw it as responsibility. Silence pressed in again. The Queen's glow dimmed, then stabilized. Responsibility is obedience to structure, she replied. No, Ethan said, and the word left his mouth before he could polish it into something safer. Responsibility is understanding the cost of your choices. He felt the weight of humanity behind him, billions who would never know his name. He imagined Earth from orbit, blue and fragile, oceans swirling under thin atmosphere measured in miles, not miles thick, but miles thin. Compassion had built hospitals in hurricane zones. Compassion had sent crews back into damaged stations to retrieve strangers. It was inefficient. It was costly. It was human. The Queen studied him as though encountering a variable she could not fully map. If compassion fractures my empire, she asked quietly, will your species repair it? Ethan exhaled slowly. No, Your Majesty. But it might help your daughter build something stronger than fear. For the first time, the vast chamber did not feel like a courtroom. It felt like the edge of a decision that would echo far beyond two individuals standing under artificial light, suspended between order and something dangerously close to hope. The chamber did not respond to his answer, but something in the air shifted, subtle as a change in gravity. Ethan felt it in his knees, in the quiet hum beneath the floor, as if the structure itself was recalculating. Queen Valthara drifted lower until her eyes were level with his. Only a few feet separating human breath from alien luminescence. Up close, her skin was not simply blue. It carried threads of silver light moving beneath the surface, like slow lightning trapped under ice. You presume to define strength, she said, and there was no anger in it now, only scrutiny. You are one individual from a species still confined to the outer spiral arms. Ethan almost smiled at that. Confined, as if distance measured worth. He thought of Earth again, 7,900 miles in diameter, spinning quietly around an ordinary star. Ordinary did not mean insignificant. I do not define strength, he replied. I have just seen what survives. The Queen's gaze sharpened. Empires survive. Families survive, he answered. Communities survive. The people who choose each other when it is inconvenient. A faint vibration passed through the chamber walls, and for a moment, he wondered how many were listening beyond them. Admirals, advisors, genetic architects who had shaped a dynasty over centuries. He imagined their calculations running in real time, measuring risk in percentages and predictive models. He had none of that, only memory. He remembered Lyra standing beside him on the docking platform, staring out at the black stretch of space scattered with cold stars. Does it frighten you? She had asked, her voice quieter then, stripped of royal certainty. He had followed her gaze. Every day, he had said, but fear reminds me what matters. Now he faced her mother and understood the cost of that honesty. The Queen extended one luminous hand, not to touch him, but as if testing the space between them. The air shimmered. If my daughter chooses this path, she said slowly, she will alter succession protocols established for 900 cycles. Alliances will question continuity. Rivals will observe deviation. Ethan nodded once. Then they will also observe courage. The word lingered, softer than defiance, stronger than apology. The Queen's glow dimmed again, then brightened in uneven pulses, almost like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. You speak as if mercy guarantees loyalty, she said. It does not, Ethan admitted. But it builds trust. And trust lasts longer than fear. Silence fell heavier than before. He could hear the faint resonance of his own pulse in his ears. He did not kneel. He did not step back. He simply stood there, 5 feet 11 inches of flawed humanity in scuffed boots, holding eye contact with a being who commanded fleets measured in light years. Then, from somewhere behind the curved living wall, a shadow shifted. A second glow, softer, familiar. Ethan did not turn his head, but he felt it. The princess was there, listening. The Queen followed his awareness, and for the first time since the questioning began, her expression changed. Not weakness, not surrender, recognition. You would risk extinction for a principle, she said quietly. Ethan exhaled. No, Your Majesty. I would risk comfort. There is a difference. The chamber fell perfectly still, as if the entire empire were holding its breath, waiting to see whether power would choose control or something far more uncertain. The second glow stepped fully into the open, and the chamber seemed to inhale. Princess Lyra emerged from behind the living wall, her blue-silver skin softer in tone than her mother's, her posture straight but not rigid. She did not float. She walked, each step measured, deliberate, closing the 20 feet between concealment and confrontation. Ethan felt the shift ripple through the space, not political but personal. This was no longer theory. This was lineage standing in the light. Queen Vaelthyra did not turn immediately. She sensed her daughter without looking, the way gravity senses mass. You were instructed to observe, the queen said calmly. Lyra stopped at her mother's right side, close but not aligned. I have observed, she replied, her voice steady, carrying none of the tremor Ethan remembered from Doc 14. There was something new in it. Not rebellion. Not defiance. Clarity. Ethan kept his hands at his sides. He did not move toward her. He did not speak her name. This was not his moment to claim. The queen's luminous gaze shifted between them, measuring angles that had nothing to do with distance. Do you affirm his influence? She asked her daughter. The chamber tightened, as if space itself were bracing. Lyra looked at Ethan then, not for guidance, but in acknowledgement. He did not influence me, she said. He demonstrated an alternative. A faint vibration passed through the floor beneath Ethan's boots. Alternative. In an empire built on singular continuity, that word carried weight. The queen's glow dimmed along one edge, then returned, like a star adjusting fusion. And this alternative, the queen continued, requires what sacrifice? Lyra did not hesitate. Certainty. Silence followed, dense and absolute. Ethan felt it press against his ribs. He remembered her standing beside him under the observation dome, staring at a star cluster 30 light-years away. She had asked him if humans always questioned their leaders. He had laughed softly. Not always. But we question ourselves. That helps. Now she stood before the most powerful authority in her civilization and chose uncertainty over obedience. The queen finally turned fully toward her daughter. For a long moment, neither spoke. No raised voices. No spectacle. Just 2 generations separated by philosophy. You would risk destabilization, the queen said quietly. For empathy. Lyra met her gaze. I would risk stagnation without it. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time. Not in the chamber, but in the current running beneath it. The queen slowly ascended a few inches, reclaiming height, yet her light no longer burned as cold. It flickered with thought. If this path fails, she said, her voice carrying through the chamber walls, history will record the deviation. Lyra nodded once. Then let it record that we evolved. The word did not echo. It settled. Ethan exhaled slowly, aware that he was witnessing something far larger than his own survival. This was not about access to trade routes or strategic alliances. This was about what kind of future would inherit the throne. The queen's gaze returned to him one final time. It no longer scanned him as an anomaly. It regarded him as a catalyst. And in that suspended, breathless space between command and conclusion, power did something rare. It reconsidered. Reconsideration did not look dramatic. It looked like stillness. Queen Vaelthyra hovered at the center of the chamber, her light no longer pulsing in rigid intervals, but flowing in slow, thoughtful waves. The living walls, once humming with quiet analysis, settled into near silence. Ethan felt the shift in his bones. The moment had tipped, not toward victory, toward possibility. The queen's gaze moved from her daughter to the distant curve of the chamber ceiling, where faint constellations shimmered through translucent organic panels. For 900 cycles, she said evenly, our empire has expanded through precision. We predict. We optimize. We eliminate uncertainty. Her eyes returned to Lyra. You propose we introduce it. Lyra did not lower her head. I propose we acknowledge it. It has always existed. We have simply refused to name it. Ethan stood motionless, aware that his presence now carried less weight than their exchange. This was mother and heir, structure and change, standing less than 6 feet apart, yet separated by centuries of doctrine. The queen descended until her feet touched the luminous floor for the first time since Ethan had entered. The gesture was small. The impact was not. "You believe empathy strengthens governance," she said. Lyra nodded once. "It strengthens allegiance." The word lingered in the air like a recalculated equation. Allegiance chosen, not enforced. Ethan remembered Lyra asking him why. Humans volunteered for missions with low survival probabilities. He had answered simply, "Because someone has to go." She had studied him then, as if that concept defied architecture. Now she embodied it. The queen turned her attention back to Ethan. "If we adopt this philosophy," she asked, "your species will interpret it as influence." Ethan shook his head slowly. "If you adopt it, Your Majesty, it will be your strength, not ours. No pride, no claim, just truth." The chamber lights brightened by a fraction, casting sharper reflections across the queen's silver threads. "You decline ownership of the idea," she observed. "It was never mine," Ethan replied. "It is just what we do when we remember we are temporary." A subtle intake of breath moved through unseen observers beyond the walls. Temporary. Empires did not speak that language. Humans did. The queen studied him as though measuring lifespan against legacy. "You accept that your species may gain nothing from this exchange," she said. "Yes," Ethan answered. "Compassion is not a trade agreement." Silence deepened again, but it felt different now. Not tense. Considered. Lyra stepped half a pace closer to her mother. "If we rule through fear," she said quietly, "we will always need more of it. If we rule through trust, we will need less." The queen closed her eyes for a brief moment, and the chamber dimmed with her. When they opened again, the cold precision remained, but something else threaded through it. Not softness. Intention. "Then we will test this deviation," she declared. Not as accusation, as decree. The living walls responded with a low harmonic tone, carrying the decision outward like a signal. Ethan felt his lungs finally release a breath he had been holding for minutes. This was not surrender. It was evolution in motion. And in that vast white chamber, under lights that mimicked distant stars, an empire took its first uncertain step towards something it had never calculated before. The harmonic tone did not fade immediately. It traveled through the chamber like a vow, low and resonant, vibrating against the soles of Ethan's boots. "Test this deviation." The words hung in the air with the weight of policy, not emotion. Queen Vaelthora rose again, not as high as before, but enough to reclaim her vantage point. The difference was subtle. She was still sovereign, but now she shared the space rather than dominating it. "A trial phase will begin at once," she said, her voice carrying beyond the visible walls. "Regional governors will integrate discretionary compassion protocols within controlled sectors." The language was clinical, almost mechanical. Yet beneath it, Ethan sensed the tremor of something unprecedented. Lyra exhaled slowly beside her mother, a sound so soft it barely registered, but Ethan heard it. Relief measured in inches, not miles. The queen's eyes shifted toward him once more. "You will remain as observational consultant during initial implementation," she stated. It was not a request. Ethan blinked. He had expected dismissal, perhaps even immediate escort back to the transport docks. Instead, he was being asked to stand at the edge of an empire and watch it change. "I am not a strategist," he said carefully. "I repair broken systems." The faintest curve touched the queen's luminous expression. Precisely. The chamber lights warmed by a fraction of a degree, shifting from sterile white to a tone closer to dawn. Ethan felt the symbolism whether it was intentional or not. He glanced at Lyra. She held his gaze briefly, gratitude present but restrained. This was not about personal loyalty. It was about precedent. "You understand," the queen continued, "that if instability escalates beyond projected tolerances, this experiment will conclude." Ethan nodded once. Growth always looks unstable at first. He did not smile when he said it. He meant it. The living walls began to display faint streams of data, lines of light moving like rivers across translucent surfaces. Entire sectors of a civilization adjusting variables in real time. Compassion quantified. Empathy modeled. Ethan almost laughed at the impossibility of it. Back home, compassion had never required a formula. It had required a choice. Lyra stepped forward, her posture aligned now not in opposition to her mother, but beside her. Then we begin, she said. No hesitation. No flourish. The queen inclined her head a fraction of an inch, an acknowledgement that carried more weight than applause. Ethan felt the enormity of what had just occurred. Not a revolution. Not a surrender. A shift in direction measured by degrees instead of explosions. He realized then that the true risk had not been his life. It had been their certainty. The chamber doors behind him parted with a soft, organic sigh, revealing a corridor illuminated in soft blue light stretching more than 100 yards into the heart of the capital. An invitation. Or a responsibility. Ethan took a single step forward, then paused. He turned slightly toward the queen. Your Majesty, he said quietly. Compassion does not weaken structure. It gives people a reason to protect it. The queen regarded him in silence for a long moment. Then she answered, not to him alone, but to the future unfolding in data streams around them. Then let us see if mercy can sustain an empire. And as Ethan walked into the corridor beside a princess who had chosen uncertainty, he understood that sometimes the most powerful force in the galaxy was not command, but conscience. The corridor stretched ahead for more than 100 yards, curved and luminous, its walls alive with streams of data flowing like silent waterfalls. Ethan walked beside Princess Lyra, their footsteps out of sync at first, human leather against polished organic alloy. Behind them, the chamber doors sealed with a muted breath. The decision had been made. Now it had to survive reality. The governors will resist, Lyra said quietly as they moved, her voice no longer amplified by ceremony. It sounded younger here, more honest. Ethan glanced at the shifting light along the walls. Entire sectors of the empire were recalibrating policy in real time. Of course they will, he replied. Change threatens people who benefit from the way things are. Lyra folded her hands behind her back, posture disciplined, but he noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. If instability rises beyond projected tolerances, my mother will terminate the trial. Ethan nodded. The stakes were no longer theoretical. A single failed region could be used as proof that compassion was flawed. Then we do not aim for perfection, he said. We aim for proof. She looked at him, curious. Proof of what? That trust produces results fear cannot. As if summoned by the thought, the corridor walls shifted, projecting a live feed from one of the outer sectors. A governance hall similar to the one they had left, but smaller, harsher in lighting. A regional commander stood before a group of civilians requesting resource reallocation after a supply miscalculation. Under previous protocol, the request would have been denied without review. Now the commander hesitated. The pause lasted only 3 seconds. But it was there. Lyra exhaled softly. He is considering variables previously marked irrelevant, she observed. Ethan felt a quiet warmth settle in his chest. 3 seconds. On Earth, 3 seconds could be the difference between turning away and stepping in. That pause matters, he said. It means he sees them. Another feed flickered to life. In a distant mining sector spanning nearly 50 miles of asteroid field, a supervisor authorized additional rest cycles after reviewing biometric stress indicators rather than dismissing them as inefficiency. Production graphs dipped by a fraction of a percent. Injury projections dropped by 5. The numbers hovered in translucent blue above the corridor floor. Lyra studied them carefully. Short-term output decreases, she murmured. Long-term stability improves. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. That is how it usually works. Yet even as the data showed promise, another alert pulsed red along the far wall. A border sector reported unrest among officers who believed the new protocols signaled weakness to neighboring powers. Lyra stiffened slightly. There, she said. Resistance. Ethan stopped walking. The corridor light reflected in his eyes. Every shift creates friction, he answered. The question is whether you hold steady or retreat. She turned fully toward him now, searching his face for doubt. And if the friction becomes too great? He met her gaze without hesitation. Then you remind them what you are building. Not control. Not dominance. A future people choose to defend. The red alert dimmed as the feed updated. The officers were not revolting. They were requesting clarification. Dialogue instead of defiance. Lyra watched the numbers stabilize, then looked back toward the sealed chamber behind them, more than 100 yards away, yet still heavy in memory. This is only the first hour, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. The first hour is always the hardest. Above them, Data continued to stream like constellations being rewritten. An empire had not transformed. It had simply taken a breath. And for the first time in 900 cycles, that breath carried something unfamiliar. Hope, measured not in light years, but in seconds of hesitation that changed everything. By the second hour, the numbers began to argue with each other. Production in 3 outer sectors dipped by 2%, while civilian compliance reports rose by 11. Border Patrol response times slowed by 6 seconds on average, yet dispute resolutions completed without escalation increased by 19. The corridor walls pulsed with conflicting data, blue and amber lines weaving like nerves under translucent skin. Ethan stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, reading the streams the way he once read pressure gauges on Dock 14. Systems under strain did not fail immediately. They revealed where reinforcement was needed. Princess Lyra watched a cluster of red indicators flicker along the Empire's northern rim, an expanse spanning nearly 300 light years. Military advisors are requesting suspension of discretionary protocols in contested zones, she said. Her voice remained steady, but the glow along her collarbone brightened slightly, a tell he had begun to recognize. Concern, not fear. Ethan stepped closer to the projection, studying the feed. A fleet commander stood before a tactical display, arguing that hesitation signaled vulnerability. They believe mercy invites testing, Lyra continued. That rivals will interpret restraint as decline. Ethan nodded slowly. They are not entirely wrong, he said. Lyra turned toward him sharply, surprised by the concession. He did not look away from the data. Any shift in posture invites observation. The question is what happens after the observation. As if on cue, another feed opened. A neighboring power had repositioned reconnaissance vessels along the border, scanning for weakness. The Empire's defense grid registered the movement instantly. Under previous doctrine, countermeasures would have been deployed within minutes. Now the decision window extended. 10 seconds. 20. 30. The chamber air felt thinner even in the corridor. Lyra's hands tightened behind her back. If they advance further, the trial will be blamed, she said quietly. Ethan thought of Ohio thunderstorms rolling across flat farmland, dark clouds building pressure before breaking. Sometimes, he said, holding your ground without escalating is the strongest signal you can send. The fleet commander on the projection requested authorization to respond with a show of force. The request hung in the system queue, awaiting royal confirmation. 300 light years of tension balanced on a single decision. Ethan glanced at Lyra. What does your instinct say? She hesitated. Not from uncertainty, but from weight. To defend without provoking, she answered. To signal readiness, not aggression. Ethan nodded once. Then do that. She stepped forward and activated the command interface. Instead of deploying additional assault vessels, she authorized visible defensive recalibration and opened a diplomatic channel simultaneously. The message transmitted across space at the speed of light, carrying not threat, but clarity. Minutes passed. The reconnaissance vessels slowed. They did not retreat immediately, but they did not advance. The red indicators softened. To amber. Lyra exhaled slowly, her glow stabilizing. They are recalculating, she said. Ethan allowed himself a quiet breath. So are you. The corridor lights shifted warmer again, subtle but undeniable. Data streams began to reflect stabilization curves rather than spikes. Compassion had not dismantled defense. It had redefined it. At the far end of the corridor, more than 100 yards away, the chamber doors reopened. Queen Vaelthyra emerged, observing the projections in silence. She did not speak at first. She simply watched the border feed settle into equilibrium. Then, almost imperceptibly, she inclined her head toward her daughter. Not approval, not surrender. Recognition of judgment exercised under pressure. Ethan understood the significance. Mercy had faced its first real test under scrutiny of rival empires. And it had not collapsed. It had held. The border indicators stabilized into a steady line of amber, no longer flashing, no longer demanding immediate correction. 300 light years of tension had eased without a single escalation order. In the corridor, the air felt different now, not lighter, but clearer, as if something dense had dissolved. Queen Vaelthyra stood beside her daughter, both of them facing the streaming projections that mapped an empire in motion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Ethan remained a respectful distance away, boots planted on the luminous floor, hands relaxed at his sides. He understood that this silence mattered more than any declaration. Finally, the Queen's voice carried through the corridor, calm and resonant. The neighboring power has reduced reconnaissance velocity by 12%. Diplomatic channels remain open. She turned slightly toward Lyra. Your restraint did not invite invasion. Lyra inclined her head, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of shared responsibility. It invited dialogue, she said softly. The data streams began to adjust across multiple sectors. Civilian compliance continued to rise. Military readiness remained within acceptable thresholds. Productivity curves, which had dipped earlier, started to recover as worker fatigue indices declined. The numbers did not celebrate. They confirmed. Ethan watched the shifting graphs and felt something steady inside his chest. Not pride. Not relief. Recognition. Systems responded to how they were treated. Machines, people, entire civilizations. The Queen approached him slowly, her blue-silver glow reflecting in his eyes. She was close enough now that he could see the fine threads of light beneath her skin, moving in complex patterns, like thoughts made visible. Human Ethan Cole, she said, using his full name for the first time. Your species measures power differently. It was not a question. He met her gaze without lowering his own. We measure it by what it protects, he answered quietly. The corridor fell silent again, but it was no longer tense. It felt earned. The Queen studied him as though committing his expression to memory. This trial will continue, she declared. Compassion will be integrated into strategic doctrine where stability permits. Not as weakness, as calculated strength. The words carried outward through the living walls, transmitted across sectors, recorded in archives that would outlast them all. Lyra stepped forward, standing beside her mother, not behind her. The distance between them had narrowed to inches. Not identical. Aligned. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into something permanent. He had not conquered an empire. He had not dismantled its fleets. He had answered a question honestly. And honesty had shifted the trajectory of 900 cycles of certainty. The corridor lights warmed to a soft dawn hue, casting long reflections across the floor. Outside the Capitol dome, stars burned in quiet indifference, millions of miles apart, yet connected by gravity unseen. The Queen looked toward those distant lights and spoke one final time, her voice lower now, almost reflective. In a galaxy ruled by command, she said, we will test conscience. Ethan allowed himself a small breath, steady and human. He was not a hero. He had not raised a weapon. He had raised a standard. And in that vast empire of precision and power, humanity had become not a threat, but a mirror. The stars reflected in Lyra's luminous eyes, and for the first time, they did not look cold.